Hello, Be Worth Following podcast listeners. For some of you who have been regular listeners, you may have noticed that we've been away for a little while, 181 days to be exact. Why did we have such a hiatus? Well, it's kind of good news and bad news. The bad news is we just ran out of time for podcast work during the last 6 months. The good news is we were working on a very exciting video project. So we have launched a video series called The Only Leaders Worth Following. It's currently being hosted on the Right Now Media platform, and Right Now is allowing folks free access to that video series. So we're really excited to get that out. It's based on the book, The Only Leaders Worth Following, and that plus some other pretty heavy video work that we have been into has just consumed all of our time and creative energy. So we ended up taking a little bit of a break from the podcast, but we are back now and are really excited about what's coming up for the Be Worth Following podcast. So in this episode that's coming up, you're going to get a chance to hear from an incredible leader. I won't spoil it, that's coming up, but somebody who I've had a chance to personally know for almost 2 decades now. Then, as we get into October, for those of you that are baseball fans and pay attention to the Major League Baseball playoffs, we're going to get a chance to listen to somebody who has led in that world in a meaningful way. We get into November, and we've got an author with a book coming out we're going to get a chance to visit with. In December, we've got a guest who has a one-person play that's coming out in December. We'll get a chance to talk with him. And then in January, we've got somebody who travels the world speaking about leadership. So very excited about what's coming up on the Be Worth Following podcast. I'm really excited to be back. I've missed doing it. I love being at the microphone, getting a chance to visit with our guests and share thoughts and dig in. And so it's time to get back at it. So maybe I should just say, welcome back to all of us. We are all now back at the Be Worth Following podcast, and it's time for us to dig in to this month's episode. Here we go.
I think sometimes, particularly senior leaders, see that they're too busy to really do that leader development. And I think that's a huge mistake. There's no doubt about it. You got to curve out time if you're going to do that kind of development with other people.
What does it take for us as leaders to keep the development of others as a top leadership priority? Today, we're going to find out. I'm your host, Tim Spiker, and this is the Be Worth Following podcast. On this show, we talk with exceptional leaders, thinkers, and researchers about what actually drives effective leadership across the globe and over time. You just heard from retired Marine Corps officer Colonel Art Athens. Over the course of more than 30 years in the Marine Corps, Colonel Athens held command and staff assignments across all 4 Marine aircraft wings. He also served as an instructor and academic dean for the Marine Corps equivalent of the Navy's Top Gun School. Following his military career, he became the Naval Academy's first distinguished military professor of leadership and later served for over a decade as the director of the Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership. He also served as Commandant of Midshipmen at the United States Merchant Marine Academy and was selected as a White House Fellow under President Ronald Reagan. In this episode, you'll discover why Colonel Athens talks about Dixie cups and crystal glasses in relationship to leading well. You'll see how attending a rainy high school soccer game significantly shifted one of his relationships up the chain of command. And you'll hear why benches and bullpens are important concepts in how we think about developing those we lead. But first, we begin with the early influencers who shaped Colonel Athens' foundational understanding of leadership from his childhood through his graduation from the United States Naval Academy.
I would really say that it did start with my dad. My dad was a manufacturing executive with, at that time it was Sperry Gyroscope that eventually became Sperry Rand, and then it went on from there with different names. But he showed me some key attributes of leadership, both by what he said, what he had me read, and then actually showing up at the plant that he ran at various times to really see what that looked like. And what was great about him was how he treated people. It didn't matter whether you were the lowest person on the totem pole in the organization, or you were a peer or someone above him. He treated everybody with respect. He cared about people, and I always loved that part of it. He was also very decisive. He could make decisions. I noticed that both within the family and then again, just talking to him about how he ran his facilities. The other part was being out with the people. He didn't like being in his office. That was very clear. He wanted to be out to find what was really going on and just having the interaction. And I picked up on how important that really was. Leadership wasn't done in the office, it was going to be done beyond that. As I think about growing up, besides my dad, probably my high school lacrosse coach, Coach Aaron Lippman, he was a former Marine. I really didn't start thinking about the Marine Corps back then, but he had a toughness and a discipline and a demand for excellence, and at the same time also cared about the players very deeply. And I really liked that combination. Went to the Naval Academy. There was a chaplain who was just a fantastic mentor to me. Some of the senior officers at the Naval Academy were important. And then as I came into the Marine Corps, there became this larger network of people that took time to talk to me, who I could reach out to ask questions. And, I could list name after name, most of whom people would not know, but I knew and they knew me. And that was their investment in me that really made all the difference as I began to think about leadership. Because I do think there are building blocks to leader development. And one of those is coaching and mentoring. Like, we need people that are further along the way that can reach back to us and kind of show us the pathway. And then as I continued on as a leader, I realized how it was important to reach back myself as well, to bring people along. And I'm still doing that to this day. But there are a whole lot of people that made a big difference in my life that I've tried to thank as many as I have been able to looking back, because they deserve that thanks. And as well, I feel part of what they've looked to for me is to do the same thing for other people. And I've felt that obligation in a way that has driven a lot of my interest in leader development over the years. I think it's always good to have a diversity of people that bring diversity of thought and how to do leadership into your life, so that you can actually take pieces and parts of that and develop your own style and way ahead. And I look at some of those people and realize there were certain ones, they were the right ones to ask this particular question to. And when it was another question, maybe it was a family question, there was someone else who was also in that category. But I have been blessed by having a lot of great mentors over the years. And I always encourage my own children how important that is to find those kinds of people that are willing to be part of your life.
When you think back on your career and you think about this topic of mentoring and coaching, what is it from your perspective as you have led and then developed leaders? What is it that gets in the way of leaders actively participating in coaching and mentoring at a high level?
I think sometimes, particularly senior leaders, see that they're too busy to really do that leader development. And I think that's a huge mistake. I actually think about it a little bit. I don't have all the statistics in my mind, but the change in baseball when it comes to relief pitchers. It used to be in the old days, the starting pitcher would typically pitch 9 innings, or that was the most common way it was. And if you look statistically, the numbers of full games being pitched by Major League Baseball pitchers has declined enormously. And the key now are the relief pitchers. Now they're paying big dollars to get the right relief pitchers because they know they're going to come in. And I think leaders actually have to think about it that way, that it's not, hey, I'm building a bench. Because I've always felt that I don't like that term, because bench, a lot of times people on the bench never go in, and there's a connotation that goes with bench for a lot of people, like it's not a positive one.
Yeah.
And I say, hey, you got to boost your bullpen. Those relief pitchers know they're going in, so you better invest in them. So the point is, though, a lot of the senior leaders just don't see how important it is. They're, I think, in some ways short-sighted on that, but they're busy. There's no doubt about it. You got to curve out time if you're going to do that kind of development with other people. I think another thing that happens is if they do get involved in it, it becomes a tutorial towards that other person. They're not listening well, they're instructing as to what comes out. And the person who's being mentored should be asked a lot more questions than they should be told things. So those senior leaders sometimes aren't well prepared for how you even go about the coaching and mentoring process, or they feel like, well, there's others that can be doing that. I don't need to do that personally. So those are the things that I think immediately get in the way. And certainly arrogance can be that way too. I'm the senior leader. I know everything. You're the mentee, and I'll just pump you with what I know, and it'll all be fine. And it doesn't turn out that way.
So this idea that you've presented, bullpen versus bench, this idea of they're coming in, the person is coming in. It's not a question about whether or not they're going to be in that role. They're coming in and we need to get ready for that. It really shifts the mentality. But related to that, you also have some analogies where you talk about a Dixie cup. I wonder if you could share that because I think it plays a really important role as we think about coaching and mentoring as well.
What you asked about was how I sometimes look at leadership from the standpoint of how leaders look at their people, whether it's a Dixie cup or whether it's a crystal glass. And this differentiation is mainly, Dixie cups come out of those dispensers like at the workout facility, and they all look about the same and they get crushed. And if they do get crushed, you just shove them to the side and get the next one. There's not effort that anybody uses with a Dixie cup. It'll serve its purpose for the moment and then it gets thrown away. Crystal glasses are different. We look at them in a way where we want to keep them shiny. We want to keep them where they're going to serve their purpose over the long term. And if there is a crack or something in it, particularly if it's a valuable crystal glass, we want to make some repairs to it. We want to make sure it gets back in the action. I've often said that I listen to my own children, and when they talk about their own leader, I can always tell whether that leader looks at my son or daughter as a Dixie cup or a crystal glass just by the perception that they have of that person. And I found over the years, both personally as well as observationally, if we as leaders really look at our people as crystal glasses, it makes a huge difference of what we're going to do and how we're going to invest in those people. I don't think it's very common, unfortunately. I think there's there's a lot of leaders that are looking at Dixie cups rather than the crystal glasses. And the challenge is looking at all the people we have that are working for us as crystal glasses, because sometimes we may get to the point where we at least look at a couple of the people as crystal glasses and then the rest are Dixie cups. But that's not what leadership is about. Admiral Stockdale, who was the prisoner of war back in the Vietnamese War, 7.5 years as a POW, the senior naval officer in what was jokingly or sarcastically called the Hanoi Hilton. He used to talk about these different roles of a leader, and one of them he talked about was being a shepherd. And one of the things he talked about is you're the shepherd for all the sheep, not just a few of them that you happen to really like. And it goes back to the Dixie cup versus crystal glasses. We got to see all our people as crystal glasses and invest in them and care about them in that manner.
What do you do if you're visiting with a leader who has trouble getting there? I mean, a lot of the things we're talking about is what is the mentality? What is the perspective, the story that the leader shows up with? Are we showing up with this mentality of seeing people as crystal glasses versus Dixie cups? Do we have the mentality of bullpen versus bench? But when a leader you're visiting with says, look, I'm looking at the evidence. I've got 10 people that I'm responsible for, and I'm telling you, 7 of them are Dixie cups, and you want me to call them crystal glasses, and then roll out all the evidence, all the Dixie cup evidence. Let me show you all the evidence that I've got a bunch of Dixie cups here. What would you say to that leader who doesn't have that, everybody's a crystal glass mentality?
I would say it's been nice working with you. No, it's obviously, Tim, it's not a simple solution to that. There has to be a lot of investment in that leader himself or herself to try to discover what's preventing you from caring about your people. Sometimes they've just never thought about it. And sometimes when you point it out, they go, oh, I really didn't fully understand that. And then you perhaps give them some techniques that help them in that caring process. Sometimes you find out that those leaders have never been cared for themselves. So they have no idea how they're supposed to care for someone else. And sometimes, I can fulfill that role in actually caring about them, so they're freed to actually care about others. But sometimes there are ones that just they don't get it, and they're just stubborn. They believe that leadership is something different from that. Tim, you know, in our interactions that I do like stories, and I think stories can be very, very helpful to try to break through some of those kinds of things. Not just stories that are, historical stories or personal stories, but I think the other kind of story is showing them by story how that lack of concern is affecting one of those Dixie cups by observing what's going on day to day when you have that flexibility to do that. And then showing them by story, did you see what happened to Louise because of the way you act? She's not as proficient now, and I know you care about proficiency, and you should. If you want to get the proficiency up, that's where caring comes in, but it should come in a more true from the heart type of caring, because if you just do it mechanically, transactional leadership, I'm gonna care about you, but I'm expecting this thing in return, then you lose out on, what is commonly called transformational leadership, which I think great organizations demonstrate that through their leadership. I was just talking to a young man the other day about the art and science of leadership. There is a little bit of science. There's things that can be learned about leadership and how to do certain things. But there's an art too. And sometimes that paintbrush has to be a couple of the hairs pulled out and a couple of new ones put in to allow the artistic piece to come through. I was at uh, I'll just say it's an Army school because I don't think the person's listening, but I don't want to pin it on this particular person.
Just in case.
But
Right. Yeah.
there was it was an Army school, and it was in my section, my little seminar section. There were mainly Army guys, and I was the only Marine. And for some reason, this individual didn't seem to like Marines. And there was a tension that was very clear about that. And when it comes to being looked at as a Dixie cup, I'm sure he definitely looked at me as a Dixie cup. And this is where sometimes the Dixie cup can help make some of the change in the person who's treating them that way. And I just engaged him in conversation over time. And I realized there were two things that were really important to him: his yellow Labrador retriever and his son. And his son was a very good soccer player. I love dogs, so it was very natural. He actually lived fairly close to us, so I would kind of pal up with him when he was walking his dog to get to talk about the dog. Broke down some barriers. But then I asked for his son's soccer schedule. And he was playing at the high school level at that point, and he gave me the soccer schedule. And we drug everybody, the whole family. I'm not sure how many we had at that time, but it was probably 6 or something like that.
Well, hold on. For those listening, I just have to say, for the context of the story, when he says, I don't know how many we had at that time, Colonel Athens and his wife have 10 children and a multitude of grandchildren at this point. So just to give a little context, when you say, I don't know how many we had, let me frame that for me.
So we go to the soccer game, and it starts raining, like hard. It was miserable. And, every bone in my body said we should really leave. But I thought, we're going to stay. We're going to stay through the game. The next week, everything changed with he and I. And I think he actually changed to seeing me as a crystal glass. And it didn't come from the outside. It came from the Dixie cup, who showed enough interest and caring in him that, and I don't think this always happens, but in his case, it did. It really changed because everybody has something they're really, really passionate and interested about. And a lot of times it has nothing to do with the job. And again, I don't think we want to do this to manipulate people. We want to do because, hey, I'm interested in watching your son play soccer. You think it's important. I understand that because of my own family. Let me watch him. But I don't think anybody had ever done that in his life. And so again, he saw an example of caring from the other direction, but it affected how he, not just, it didn't just affect how he looked at me. I just saw a more compassionate, caring leader, and I'm still very close to him. So, it's this complexity of people interaction that leadership is all about. Again, this young person I was talking to yesterday, why is leadership so hard? We were talking about kind of the foundations of what is leadership. Why is it hard? Because there's a bunch of people that are involved, and they have different priorities, they have different values, they have different intent, they have all those kinds of things. Then you add in the environment to it, which can be very different, it becomes something that's very, very challenging. And that's why, when someone says, hey, give me the formula for making this better or work or whatever, yeah, I can give you some ideas, but if you try to apply it as a formula, you're going to be challenged by that. And that's why I like to emphasize, particularly to engineers, scientists, and mathematicians, and I'm a math background guy, hey, it's a lot more than the math. It's people. And that's why I think it's so important for people who are leaders to read broadly and read about biographies and history and philosophy and theology and all these different things that relate to how people interact and do what they do. That's where you're going to learn from the pieces of paper, at least, which is one of the parts of leadership development, but it's not the only one, of course.
Yeah. One of the things that's screaming out to me as I hear these stories that you're sharing is the word genuine. Getting back to this idea about formulas and you have math and science background. I have an engineering degree. It's easy to go there to say what's the formula, but fundamentally, what happens between a leader and a follower is the word relationship. And as you said, there are principles certainly that we can apply, but this transactional relationship is very different than a transformational relationship. You're reminding me of a mentor that I had very early in my career, and it is of somebody whose name I could not possibly even guess as to what it is right now, because frankly, that's the level of impact this person had on me, which was nothing at all. Because as I started out in the relationship, the very first meeting, I will never forget this. First lunch, now this was in a business, and this person was my assigned mentor. And so I remember sitting down at lunch, and the person sat down and said very dryly, now let me explain to you what the nature of our relationship is going to be. And I'm not anti setting, ground rules and parameters and expectations. All those things are great. That was the first comment out of the person's mouth at the lunch. And while I've completely forgotten the person, I've never forgotten the comment, because immediately I thought, this isn't going to be what I hoped it was going to be. I hoped to have a more human interaction. And those were the first words. And so, what there was extraordinarily transactional. And this idea of kind of, if I were to put it this way, faking care in order to get something doesn't work in the long run. You got to genuinely want to be in the cold rain watching somebody else's kid's soccer game with 6 of your own kids there. There's got to be a genuineness to it, or it's not effective.
It's a famous word that's thrown around a lot in leadership circles, the word trust that has to be built. And it's certainly true how critical that is. And genuineness leads to that trust because people know who you are. And I think, this is a little bit off the topic, but not completely, is that I think one of the things that leaders are always concerned about is that they don't want to show any weakness, because they feel if they show a weakness, then the people will feel, well, they're not competent in what they do. And it's just not true. First of all, no leader can do it all. These job descriptions that come out for leadership positions that say, we want someone who's visionary but can look at the details. We want you to be outgoing but also thoughtful. You don't find someone who can do all those things. So you have to bring to the table where your strengths are. Marcus Buckingham wrote a book a long time ago about Now Discover Your Strengths. He says, maximize your strengths and manage your weaknesses. And I think that's so very true. But leaders don't necessarily want to admit that they've got something there. And of course, all the people around them realize it, And so you might as well just get it out that, hey, one of the things I'm not that great at is like the administrative details of things. I need your help. And if you'll help me, I can try to bring my strengths to the table as best as I can. And a lot of times leaders are turned off by the people who have the gifting that's just the opposite of what they don't have. And if they could just see that, they would bring so much more to the table from those other people that are anxious to use what they're really good at. But there is this concern. So when I was at the Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership at the Naval Academy, we had a distinguished chair of leadership there, and I'll mention his name because he's a hero of mine, General John Sattler. General Sattler was a Marine Expeditionary Force commander in Iraq during the Iraq War, thousands and thousands of people he was responsible for. combat operations. He ran the Horn of Africa at one point in time. He then was the J5 on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is the person who plans policies and strategy, which is just about everything, and so he had all these kinds of jobs. So he became the distinguished chair of leadership as a retiree and technically worked for me, so here I'm a retired colonel and I have a retired 3-star general. And you're never sure how that relationship is going to unfold, but he was the most humble, selfless, sacrificial individual, one of the most that I truly have met over the years. But he would talk to groups, whether it was our students, we call them midshipmen at the Naval Academy, or faculty or officers or wherever it is. He was there for 7 years while I was there for 11. So 7 of the 11 years. I never heard him tell a story that put him in a positive light as to how he did what he did. Never in 7 years. He would always have these stories of how he had learned something the hard way, what he had learned from it, and how he came back from it. But I watched him and I thought, how many senior people, whether military, civilian, doesn't matter, would be willing to tell these failure stories with the opportunity to teach someone a lesson, but also have those people look up and go, wow, he became a 3-star general and he had these things that he did. I will still remember there was a student, it was the end of their senior year, so they had been 4 years at the Naval Academy. I happened to be outside the office when this person came to see General Sattler, and he related one of the failure stories that General Sattler had told and the lesson that he learned from it. And he said, General Sattler, I just want you to know, I've been here for 4 years. I don't remember a single thing from one of my classes, but I remember every story that you have told in this last year that I've had the opportunity to listen to. And I believe that guy. I'm sure he actually learned some things over the 4 years, but the power of that storytelling that he showed, but his vulnerability, his genuineness in front of other people was so refreshing. And people loved to come and listen to what he had to say. And never, I don't think that people looked at him and go, okay, he didn't really know what he was doing. Like, you listen to these stories, but each story he weaved in a way that it had a message, it had a recovery process to it, and it had a lifelong learning.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't just leave it, hey, I blew it. He then said what he learned about it, and then what others could learn about it going forward as well. It has stuck with me, and he remains one of my heroes.
I had a mentor influence in my life who said, this is going to sound harsh, but I smiled and laughed when he said it because I knew what he was saying. He said, Tim, please don't go and find the perfect company and go work there, because the minute that you walk in the door, it will no longer be the perfect company. But it's true. There are no perfect places and there are no perfect people. And you said it as well. The people that we're leading, trust me, they already know that we're not perfect. This is not going to be a newsflash to them when we share, hey, I've got some shortcomings. So if you're concerned about people finding out, they already know.
That's so true. Marshall Goldsmith, who's sort of known as one of the best executive coaches out there, has written a number of books. A number of years ago, the Navy had a program where the newly promoted admirals would go to this 2-week program where they would have different exercises, speakers, and things like that. And I happened to be one of the speakers, and Marshall Goldsmith was one of the speakers. And I'd never met him before. I maybe have heard of him, but he would get up there. So this is the newly minted admirals of the Navy. And he would say, how many of you have spent a fair amount of time going to the deck plates of the ship and asking your sailors how you are doing as the leader? And, you'd see the admirals kind of shuffling in their chairs a little bit. So no one would raise their hand. None of the admirals would raise their hand. And he would say, so why is that? Why don't you spend more time going down to different people and saying, hey, give me some feedback. How am I doing? Even though Marshall Goldsmith calls it feed forward, because it's to get you better going forward. But anyway, feedback. And the admirals wouldn't say anything. And then invariably, because I went to a number of these sessions, an admiral would kind of put his hand up and say, I'm not sure I'd really want to hear what it is, because I'd feel maybe obligated to have to change something. And another hand would go up and they'd say, well, we don't want to admit that we don't listen well or anything like that in having a discussion with one of our sailors. And, Goldsmith would always say, are you telling me that those sailors don't know that you don't listen well? You think you're informing them? They already know that. You might as well go ahead and get the feedback and do something about it, and move forward. But I always remember that. And Marshall Goldsmith also, after we had been together a couple times, said, oh, you heard me talk to the admirals. He said, when's the last time you asked your children how you were doing as a father? I said, you mean like in a formal, like, sit? Yeah, just like I was talking to the admirals out there. I said, I'm not sure I've ever done that. This was a number of years ago. And for the older ones, I actually sat down with them and asked them, how was I doing? And a lot of times, particularly if you're in a leadership position, you're going to have to do this a couple of times, because the first time you ask and you haven't done it ever, those people are going to be going, I'm not going to tell you the truth. But after time, they see, no, I really want to get it. And I can very distinctly remember one of my sons giving me a particular item of feedback that affected my ability to probably raise him better than I would have if I hadn't had that. So again, we want to be genuine. We want to hear from people. We got to have thick skin to hear what we need to, and realize that, for instance, if we don't listen very well, we can improve that some, but we're not going to become the greatest listener in the world. So that gives the leader the opportunity to say, hey, I need all of you to help me with that. I want to listen better, but also I'm going to need some input, because I'm going to miss some things because I don't listen as well as I could. Wonderful opportunities for growth, really.
Yeah. Well, this is a great transition to the flip side of the mentoring and coaching question where we started off, to say now, okay, what about on the other side of it when it comes to us as leaders? What are the things, and we've hinted at a number of them here, but what are the things that you see that get in the way of leaders receiving coaching and mentoring?
Probably the bottom line answer to that is arrogance. I think that stands in the way more than anything else. Number one, we think we know it all, or we'd like to at least have the perception be that we know it all. And then if we do get a mentor, we probably are not listening as well as we could, or maybe not doing the assignments, and I put assignments in quotation marks, an article to read or something like that the mentor says, hey, why don't you take a look at this? We go, yeah, well, I'm not, that article, I don't see any value in it. But it all relates to this idea that I'm not really into it to learn a lot. I know a lot. I'll figure out the way forward. I don't really need somebody else to do that. And so there isn't the growth mindset of, hey, I want to keep getting better. I want to have people invest in me. And I can do it like the old flour sifter, where you put the flour at the top and you sift it down. And I'm not even sure what's supposed to happen, but I guess you get the pure flour at the bottom. You're going to receive input from these different people, and there are some things that they tell you probably are not ones that you do need to take on, but you want to at least hear it and then progress from there. I think just like for the senior leader, that junior leader also sees himself as very busy and is just trying to get the job done and trying to perform and all those kinds of things. And boy, taking an extra hour out to do this meeting with this guy or gal, I don't know why I really want to do that. So there's those kinds of pressures really, to me, are at both ends. But, every leader, I don't care where they are or how long they've been leading, we have to continually think to ourselves that there are new things to learn. We need to keep developing as a leader and not sit and rest on our laurels. And I've seen that with some of the best leaders that I've worked for, that they were learners all the time, including General Sattler, just watching him of how he listened well to other people and their stories and picked up things from that. As a matter of fact, I don't think he would mind me mentioning this. He's very extroverted, very outgoing, very enthusiastic. And sometimes he would get lost in his enthusiasm when he was making more formal presentations. So I sat down with him one time, and again, this is a retired colonel to a retired 3-star general, saying, sir, if you want, I probably could give you a couple of hints as to how to maybe package or organize. I know a lot of senior people that would have someone junior come up and say that, and they'd go, yeah, well, thanks a lot. But he didn't. He said, no, let's take some time and do that. And I watched how he applied those things. So here's a guy who's already made it. And, I don't know if he would end up having more leadership positions in other realms or not, but he wanted to get better in that area. And he was willing to listen to someone who said, could I help you? And I think, again, that idea of the willingness to learn, from the people that are around us, particularly if someone is taking the time to, maybe invest in us as a mentor. And I think the other thing that mentees need to be very aware of is how important it is to say thank you to their mentor. And that encourages the mentor to keep going, to say, hey, just so this thing that we talked about, I've been able to apply it. I mean, that helps energize the mentor to keep the relationship going as well. But my bottom line is why the mentee it's not working. It's too much about themselves, and they think they know more, and they're not sure someone can really teach them very much. And that's disastrous, I think, for going forward as a leader.
What do you do in that situation? Because it's interesting for those of us that really lean into, care about coaching, mentoring, care about developing other leaders. If you run into somebody and that is their biggest roadblock, their perspective on themselves, arrogance, there are some people who would say, hey, the ship has sailed. There's nothing you can do about that. That's who they are. Other people have a different perspective. What do you do when you run into somebody that you would be influencing, leading, coaching, mentoring, and you see that arrogance pop up? What's your next move as somebody who's developing a leader for whom that is an issue?
I've been willing to be very patient with that. I can again tell you a very specific story. I was again at the Naval Academy at the Stockdale Center. There was a young man, and I don't remember who sent him to me, but they did. Obviously, very, very talented, very gifted. When I first met him, he was a sophomore. And we just kept working. I'd give him various things to read. We'd talk about what was happening in his life. We would share some stories and the rest. He got a very important leadership position at the Naval Academy. And one night, in the middle of the night, I think it was about 2 a.m, I get a call from the Commandant of Midshipmen, who's the second in charge at the Naval Academy, overseeing really all the students, because he wanted to inform me that this particular individual had gotten in big trouble, like big trouble. And the Commandant knew that I had spent a lot of time with this young man. And he said, I just felt like you should know it. So I said, well, before you adjudicate what you're going to do with this guy, would you let me just spend a little bit of time with him and find out, what was behind it or whatever. So I think it was a Monday that I finally got a chance to talk to the midshipman. And interestingly enough, right off the bat, in his mind, there were always extenuating circumstances, and that to me, when I was the commandant at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, that was the first thing I looked for. Are you willing to admit you did it? It was wrong. There's no one else to blame. This is how I'm going to recover, and this is why you should keep me. And he violated all those kinds of things. So I talked a little bit about, probably how he wanted to approach his punishment and things like that. So he was taken from his leadership position, got some other disciplinary measures, but I continued to meet with him. And one day, he pushed back from his chair in my room and he said, sir, we've been doing this for about 2.5 years. I finally understand what you're getting at with me. It's all about me. It's been all about me since the day I got here to the moment that I did what I did. And even after that, it was still about me because I was going to save my backside. He said, but I understand what it's all about is I'm not humble at all. And I could relate a couple of, that one just happens to stand out in my mind, but a lot of times it takes time, a willingness to see it, but not just, hey, you're an arrogant twit. I don't know why we're even talking. It's the gentleness of again, providing some things to read, some discussions, some stories. And sometimes there have been people that I don't see it for years, and sometimes I don't ever see it. And that's the way it is. But I've been patient with it because I think sometimes it takes different events that will occur that'll kind of snap you into it. Good to Great by Collins. I read it a long time ago when it first came out. I haven't read it in a while, but one of the things I remember is this idea of, well, how did these, as he calls them, the level 5 leaders, personal humility, strong professional will, how did this come about? And I remember Collins actually having a little bit of a story for most of those leaders that had those amazing turnarounds of those. There was something in their life that brought them to a new place. It might have been a sickness, it might have been a religious experience, a lot of different things. And you don't know when that's going to occur. So you stick with them if you can. I mean, again, I've worked with some people that I never saw a change. Other times quickly, other times a more slow process, but I think it's not giving up on them.
Yeah. Looking back on your career a bit to say, okay, if I take a broad perspective, what is something as you look back on your career so entrenched in leadership and leading and then teaching leadership, not just going out there to do it? What is something that you maybe wish that you had done differently and something that you're extraordinarily glad that you did do? So like something on either side of the coin there.
I think any of my shortcomings in leadership, it's funny how this theme comes out at different times, but I think that they were times of a lack of humility. I think it did become more about myself than it needed to be. I think how I was thinking about things were not the best for the organization. And those were the times that I look back on and I say, I definitely could have been in a better place for that. On the flip side, I would say that, and I probably got this a little bit from my dad again and some of these other mentors along the way, but the importance of vision for an organization. I think it's one of the things that I've been able to be hopeful with along the way is that I've always realized how critical that is. Peter Drucker, the famous management leadership author, once said that the first and foremost responsibility of a leader is to be a trumpet that sounds a clear sound. And as I've gone into positions, I've always felt that was a major piece, number one, that was important, but that I also had perhaps some ability to assist the organization with. Where are we going? What's going to be different a year from now than we are today? I remember starting it literally as the junior high school president of the school, and my mindset was we got to have something that we're aiming towards as a school. That's what's going to be important. And each place I've been, I think that's been a key thing that I've been able to contribute. But it's also made me think a lot about what if you don't have that? One of our sons has a planning vision perspective of about 10 minutes. If you ask him, hey, where do you see yourself in 5 years? He doesn't see 5 years. He doesn't even see a year. I'm not even sure he sees a month. But if you want a crisis handled where the pressure's at the moment, this guy is the guy you want in your court because he is very focused on more of the immediate. But a lot of times people that are like that are not as good at looking at the distance. So I've thought in developing leaders over the years, what do you do with the people that are like that? And if you look at, like the Myers-Briggs type indicator or that kind of personality instrument, and you look at the population as a whole and take the kind of makeup that makes you visionary, only about probably 25% of the population fits that category and 75% doesn't. So what do you do for leaders? And this is a great opportunity to teach leaders about this is why you need other people. Because if you don't have that, there's probably people who work for you who do, who are dying to use it. And yes, you as the leader have the ultimate decision of what that direction is going to be, and you're going to have to be an enthusiastic communicator for it. But you draw other people into that scenario to help define what is the way forward. But you can't just put it to the side and say, I'm not good at that part, but I'll do these other things. Because every grouping of people, whether it's a family or a military unit or a corporation or a nonprofit, whatever it is, they need a vision. They need to see where we're going. And for some reason, I was always struck as a young person of the Apollo program. One of my brothers-in-law was an engineer that worked on the lunar excursion module, the LEM that would, land on the moon.
Wow.
So I got a lot of stickers and all those kinds of things. My dad did some things associated with the space program. But thinking about that statement that John F. Kennedy makes before a joint session of Congress in 1961, that I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal of landing a man on the moon within this decade and returning him safely back to Earth. That to me that's what it's about, like putting people and their energy forward. And I'd like to try to do that in every place. But I've also been very conscious of how to help others who maybe don't have that as much to get people involved to do it. I've been talking about this young guy, this will be the third time, but he's a high school student. He's a rising senior, And through kind of a connection, I've agreed to do 10 sessions this summer with him on leadership. So I asked him that question. We were talking about vision and goals and things like that. And I asked him, well, what if you don't have that? And he immediately said, well, you can draw it from others. And I thought, that's great. I said, well, suppose you don't have that within your group. What do you do now? He said, I would probably go to Chat GPT. I said, this is today's generation, right? So I said, now that in itself, I'm not sure I would suggest that, but what you're saying is sometimes you got to go outside your own organization to help find the people that can bring it in. But you got to have some kind of direction for people. And that's the thing I've been most excited about, perhaps, as I've looked at my progress along the way from the organizational standpoint of what could be contributed. And I would say the other thing, I've been thrust into a lot of leadership positions where healing was a key element. There was problems within, there was problems internal to external, there are all those. And God has been gracious to me to kind of help me see and how you discern what do you do? How do you bring people back together into a team and then again move them towards that direction? So when I look back on my career, I would say the thing that makes me cringe is the times where it's been too much about me. And when I say, hey, this is maybe what I help contribute to these organizations, the vision piece and the healing have been critical and what I've enjoyed a lot about that. Since we did talk about Dixie cups and crystal glasses, of course, I like to also think that I invested an awful lot in a lot of people, and I am grateful that I kind of see some of those emails coming back and phone calls and people touching base. And I tell leaders this all the time. That's the end result of doing it where you care about your people, because they're going to remember it just like you forgot the name of the mentor who started that session. They're not going to forget you as a leader because you're going to be a leader who's worth following. It's the piece, if you think about the iceberg, it's the piece under the iceberg of this interaction with others that is going to make all the difference. You can't put to the side strategy and execution and, all those pieces. You got to do those things well. But if you don't start with the true foundation of what leadership is about, you're going to struggle. Oh, you may make money and you may do all these other things, but in the long run, that's not the legacy that I think is most important here. While we're here temporarily to do a job, and it says about Jesus that he came not to be served, but to serve. And I consider that to be at the fundamental level, that's what we're here for. We're not to be served, but to serve. And at the end of it, when it's all done, and they're going to say something about you in the eulogy, I hope that I can say, hey, I've done the work that I was brought here to do.
One of the things that I have grown to appreciate about Colonel Athens over the years that I've known him, and I've known him now for almost 20 years, is that he has a presence that is so authentic and real. It's not something that he puts on when he enters a room. It's part of who he is. And he brings the weight of that really well-developed, thoughtful leader into every interaction. He and I get a chance to visit on a regular basis, and I will tell you, it is very difficult to get the attention off of me. He is so inquisitive and interested. He is the type of knowledgeable leader who takes interest in others that we would all pine to follow. And I'm really blessed to know him. Now, as we turn our attention to what he shared during our discussion, there's a few things I want to take a moment to emphasize. Let's start with Dixie cups and crystal glasses. To take that analogy and to challenge us in terms of how do we see the people that we're leading? Do we see them as discardable and replaceable, or do we see them as something valuable to be cherished? It's tough sometimes. I mean, the reality is sometimes people are following us that we are responsible for who are difficult to like. They're difficult to lead. They're hard to connect with. They're not that enjoyable at times. But what if we decided to see them as crystal glasses in spite of some of those shortcomings? I mean, isn't that what we would want from others for ourselves when they see our shortcomings? And his point, what Colonel Athens shared, is that we begin to interact with people very differently when we see them as valuable, when we see them as crystal glasses. It shapes our language, it shapes our tone, it shapes our actions. And it brings our level of leadership higher and more valuable for them when we see them as crystal glasses rather than Dixie cups. And then we went on to talk about another analogy, benches versus bullpens. I think this is a brilliant analogy, with his point being, hey, the folks who are under your charge, they're going to come into the game. The bullpen is coming in. Somebody's going to come in the baseball analogy there. It's not a matter of will they get in or not. At some point, they're coming in. And so that changes our mentality about developing them. It's a for sure thing that they're coming in. So we have to for sure get them ready. How do we as leaders make sure that we have a bullpens mentality rather than a benches mentality? Related to that, many years ago, I had a chance to work on the west side of Pikes Peak with a leadership development group that I was working with. And we would put people through a series of leadership experiences. And we did a leadership 360 where we would get data from all around them as a leader. And I can tell you one of the realities is that this idea of bullpens rather than benches didn't come through very well with most of the leaders who we got a chance to visit with. The lowest scoring item on the 360 across the board on a regular basis was the cultivation of talent. It showed up basically as I'll do that when I have time, not as a requirement of leadership. And so how much extra time do most leaders end up having? Answer 0, you know that. And so the development of others gets put on the back burner and frankly never really picked up in a meaningful way for lots of organizations and, if we're honest, for lots of us as leaders. And so what I want us to take from that is the development of others, the cultivation of their talent is not something that's going to present itself easily to us. It's something we're going to have to prioritize. It's something we're going to have to go after. It's something that we're going to have to plan for if it's going to happen at all. It's not going to naturally be easy. And so it becomes very important that we have this bullpen mentality. And so when I think about the easy neglect that we have as leaders for developing others, and these two analogies that Colonel Athens unpacked for us so well, it leads me to the question that I want to leave you with today. And that is this. Do you see those you are leading as Dixie cups on the bench or crystal glasses in the bullpen? This is Tim Spiker reminding you to be worth following and to follow us wherever you receive your podcasts. If you've heard something valuable today, please share our podcast with your friends, family, and colleagues. And if you're up for it, leave us a 5-star review. Thanks for listening.